I'm Gerrit Davids, founder of TalkX TV, where we host SportX sponsorship as a content channel. I'm joined by Dr. Gustav Painter, an independent commentator who some time back conducted research on the rise of sports betting sponsorship in South Africa and whether we should be concerned about it from a societal point of view. You mentioned the ethical dilemma of sports entities accepting sponsorship from betting companies while trying to promote vigilance against gambling influences. How do you believe that sports organizations can resolve this paradox without compromising financial stability, which they seek? Welcome, Doc.
Hi, Gerrit. Thanks a lot for having me on today. And definitely a very important topic as we've seen this increased rise in sports betting sponsorships, both internationally and domestically in South Africa. I think it boils down to a couple of things. You talk about vigilance. Fundamentally, I think at a first level, it's really about doing proper due diligence. So if a federation or a team is about to enter such a partnership with a sports betting company, it's really about understanding what that partnership would look like, also the track record of that entity. So that's sort of on the due diligence side, and then I think one has to have some very clear guidelines, sort of demarcating the parameters of such a relationship. And here we can think about actively promoting responsible gambling, and also engaging in for example, some awareness campaigns about the potential risks and pitfalls of engaging in such a practice. So it's really about trying to be thoughtful prior to entering such relationships.
Yeah, and given the history we have with match fixing scandals across the world, and for many, many decades, so to say, what specific safeguards would you recommend to reduce the risk of manipulation arising from betting companies sponsoring sport, if there's even such a possibility, Doc?
Yes, I mean, you refer to history, and in South Africa has been, subject to a couple of these cases. One thinks about sort of the Hansie Cronje affair, that's about 25 years ago now. So I think it's really about trying to prevent a situation where sports betting partners could facilitate or be part of the outcome of these competitions or fixtures. And I think a lot of these sort of guardrails are already in place, for example, preventing athletes or coaches or officials from actually partaking in sports betting itself. I know my understanding is that, for example, in the cricket ecosystem, cell phones are actually banned within the dressing room while fixtures are on the go, and that's obviously just to prevent players from potentially being involved in funneling information or things like that to relevant parties. So because of course one of the risks in our sort of current day and age is just the ease with which one can engage in betting. I mean, these offerings are all available on various apps, and it's just on a smartphone. So it's very accessible, and so one has to put some guardrails around that, especially when it comes to sort of the players, officials, coaches, etc. And then again, I think educational initiatives are also very important. It's not just about thinking around the potential risks of being a sports bettor or a gambler. I think there's also some sort of softer things, and again, we refer back to the Cronje affair. Often sort of nefarious entities can benefit from just having some inside information that's, you're not having someone physically trying to throw a match, but they might want to know how much grass is on this pitch this morning, or what is the intent, at the toss. Some sort of indirect information like that can often have quite a big bearing on how a bettor might perceive a specific market or a specific event. So I think education, and I think a lot of this is obviously going on. The federations are, well, we hope they're aware to the right degree, but it is important to have these kind of initiatives in place and to educate. Often these athletes are very young individuals, sort of university age. And if I sort of think about the type of things I got up to and that age, one is certainly potentially vulnerable in this area. But I think if one is, again, just thoughtful and the right sort of measures in place, you can mitigate those risks.
Yeah, great. Your research also highlighted the economic pressures, which is a reality facing South African sports teams and leagues. And in your opinion, are there any alternative sponsorship modules or mechanisms or industries that could help alleviate this financial strain without introducing potential ethical or integrity concerns regarding gambling?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Obviously, sports entities are to some degree subject to market forces here, and they kind of have to take what they can get. We are seeing the sports betting companies kind of cluster and enter this space quite aggressively in the last few years. And I think that's basically a function of their core customer, which is the sort of more hardcore sports fan or who consumes sport with sort of betting in mind. Those individuals are likely still present. They are the ones that are likely to be interested in Kazakh table tennis leagues and things like that. You know, you can get quite sort of there's so much that you can potentially bet on. But in the South African context, if you think of sort of domestic competitions that have, fan attendance has eroded, and you could probably say that interest has generally eroded from a social perspective, just because there's so much content competing. It's not just the sports competing for eyeballs amongst each other. You're actually also competing against Amazon, Netflix, Disney, all the streamers, all the social media apps. So we've seen a sort of an erosion of sort of ground level support. And that makes these sports properties less attractive to sponsors. So the sports bettors are still willing to be involved because their sort of core sort of target market is likely still involved to some degree. But, your other companies are maybe less attracted to these properties because there's just less interest. So I think from a federation and team standpoint, obviously, these entities are well aware of these dynamics, and it's up to them to kind of try and make their properties as attractive as possible. Often success also breeds more interest. I think the Springboks are probably one of the best examples at the moment. I'm pretty sure that they have a queue of sponsors from a wide range of industries, fighting off each other to try and get a foot in the door, because you want to be associated with this brand that basically represents success. And I think I often like to point out that we have basically like sort of 9-year-old kids that have never known anything other than the Springboks being world champions. So you've kind of cultivated this young, new fan base. People are just obsessed with the team, and there's also a degree of authenticity to it. And I think that is what has really mobilized the support behind it. And the Springboks obviously had to work very hard to get to that point. And there was, obviously Chasing the Sun, the first documentary, really sort of digs into that. So it's about trying to cultivate that success, make your property more attractive, and sort of in the old American saying, sort of if you build it, they will come. So I think the sort of the SA20, the T20 league, which is now going into its third season, it's quite an interesting case study. It's obviously now being sponsored by Betway, I think since season 2. So it has a prominent flagship sports betting sponsorship, but it's also now signed a new deal recently with I think it's an Indian multinational data intelligence company called Zoho. So this is a product, this partnership between Cricket South Africa, SuperSport, and the IPL, which has basically created a product with a lot of dynamism around it. There's a lot of local interest. It's probably one of the only domestic competitions that has sort of really full stadiums and a really great atmosphere. And then this simultaneously then opens them up to other markets, like India, and you get some other brands coming into that. So market forces at play at a high level. So you are somewhat subject to that, but there are other things that you can do to try and make your property more attractive. And I'm sure these federations are well aware of it. I'm not sort of preaching to them.
Yeah, when we speak about the potential risks and the need to mitigate them around the notion of betting companies sponsoring sport, if one were to say that to protect the integrity of the sport, or sport for that matter, we would want to demand transparency from both the betting companies as well as the rights holders, the federations, as to talk to us regards to reported breaches of risk or potential risk. And in conclusion, what role do you see a national or international federation play in regulating the relationship between sports and betting companies to protect the integrity of sport, Doc?
Sure. Again, I think it's about being thoughtful and open-minded, but also vigilant at the same time. So these federations again can lay down some clear guidelines and establish some parameters without necessarily immediately jumping to a negative conclusion. I think in the South African context, one has to proceed with a bit of care, because sometimes the federations are themselves, they're in a position where they have to police themselves. So we talk about Cricket South Africa, SA20 has a betting sponsor, and Cricket South Africa is a partner in that sort of venture. So, there's a degree of self-policing that has to go on. So I think it's about guidelines. I think it's also about engaging with relevant thought leaders, academic researchers. This is undoubtedly an area that has been attracting a lot of research and will continue to do so in the future. And I think so it is about a genuine engagement with sort of thought leaders there, whoever they might be, to stay abreast of these developments and to see, what is the potential fallout of this, what are the risks and opportunities as well within this space. And I think one thing I'm sort of just casually monitoring is, for example, in the US, it's an interesting phenomenon. As I said, sports betting became legalized in a vast majority of states there a few years ago. And now you see sort of a gradual creeping of sports betting into the sort of viewing product. So you'll be on a certain American sports channel, and they'll be like sort of flashing betting odds sort of live. And maybe the host might quickly make reference to this special, or, you have this deposit and we'll match it, and, take these 3 teams in this fixture. And they're sort of doing it at arm's length at the moment, but one wonders about to what degree that'll really penetrate the viewing experience, which I think one has to think very carefully about how far these companies would potentially want to go, because you do have to be vigilant about these potential risks. But at a federation level, I think guardrails, providing some thought leadership, engaging with relevant parties, I think that is an important role while being open-minded at the same time.
Yeah, great talk. I think that's where we would leave it for now. But just two interesting tidbits I would like to throw in. And it was been reported at the beginning of the EPL season, the English Premier League season, 7 new deals were signed with betting companies, and it was worth in the region of £150 million. Just 7 new deals signed this season, beginning of the season. During the first week of the EPL, 6 matches were broadcast, and research were conducted, and 24,000 betting messages were broadcasted around the world on television, which the broadcasters themselves will dispute to say that it does not have any impact on the levels of gambling. But that's where we would leave it for now. Thank you for your time and insights, which is very much appreciated. And thank you for watching SportX Sponsorship, which is hosted on the TalkX TV channel. Until next time.